Thank you, Julien, Samira. Hi, everyone. I must say that earlier Julien talked about the four M's, and I am involved actually with all of the publications of 4M. My friends who are partners in CFI for 4M, and I find here the real ambience of that first 4M that was really an important moment in the Tunisian revolution, at a point in time when there was a lot of hope, a lot of enthusiasm. And I recall the first edition in Montpellier when people showed up and they were getting to meet each other and they were saying, or the people behind their pseudonyms, hello, this is X, 404, and I am whatever, all of their handles. And so I'd like to salute the decentralized publications in Tunis for the first anniversary of the revolution, in Cairo, and others. And then this enthusiasm fell by the wayside, and I have a very strong memory about an Egyptian blogger, Abebas, I think it was him, that one day said to us, Facebook was our best friend for the revolution. It's become our worst enemy since, because there was information, there were hate campaigns, there was harassment, and all of a sudden, the same instruments that served in opening doors, in unlocking doors, enabled some people to tighten down the screws. So we didn't feel this as clearly, but this was a wave. This disinformation, manipulation is obviously nothing new in that. That has always existed, and probably even in prehistory. There's got to be fake news in the Lascaux cavern on the wall. Maybe there were never any mammoths. Who knows? I reread recently an excerpt from Albert Londres, who's our father of all of us. He's the mythical reporter from the French press. And Albert Londres refers to fake news, which cause, riots in such and such a country. And they are used by political forces and by economic forces. And this is the 1920s. So it is clear that this is nothing new. What is new, obviously, is the instruments that we have. It's the extent and the speed and the coverage and the propagation. And it's the fact that technology, which has accelerated phenomenally, is currently bringing with it in its wake every day, every year, new factors that we had not even imagined a year before, which changes the terrain every time we try to find reasonable answers. I think artificial intelligence, which is a tool, which is fabulous, but it's also an extraordinarily dangerous tool in the service of disinformation. This morning, there was a communication by the Chinese agency Xinhua concerning the NATO summit in Vilnius. This communication was accompanied by a video produced by artificial intelligence, which it pretends that's showing what the NATO is doing in Ukraine. And when you can see these pictures, you say, this is incredible, what a bunch of... and this is done by artificial intelligence with a very talented production. We know that these pictures are remarkably well done, but it obviously does not say that this is fiction produced by a machine. So we are in a world where all of the borders have been removed. There is no more control whatsoever. What is new is technology, and it's the fact that and what has slipped in to the media within this opening. There are all types of conspiracy theorists, informers of various types, or pseudo-informers, or informants, and that's what's different about social media today. The federation and the union of anger that can be channeled and diverse and widespread, and which can wind up, thanks to viral effects of social media, very widespread. So this is very fast and an uncontrollable force. And sometimes they employ methods which are not those that are part of information. It makes our job harder than before because faced with multiple threats of this type, you can't have a single response. We need to have a multiple response, a varied response, and adapt it to each of these threats. So we've come a long way. I talked about the enthusiasm for you in the 4Ms, but it's enthusiasm that we felt as well when we created the 89. It was in 2007. We were the first online media that wasn't backed up with an existing media company in French presence. And we were totally convinced of the strength of interaction and participation that we would endeavor to bring about on the platform. And we even had several quite salient examples of the virtues at the time of what we were doing. Because we had already been confronted with, conspiracy theories that were there to challenge us and what we were saying and so forth. But I recall a fire that broke out in Beijing, that had a tower that burned. There were fireworks that were sent to in the roof of a work site, and it burned. And it didn't collapse. And this was a few years after the 11th September. And so the conspiracy theorists were saying, you can see why it collapsed in New York but not in Beijing. It's because the CIA or others were behind it. Obviously, I had no answer to that objection. And then in the comments on the site, we hear a position or a post that was put up by an engineer who participated in the building the tower in Beijing and who explains why the structure is not the same as the World Trade Center, with technical arguments that are totally convincing. And we're saying, this is incredible, that's wonderful. You get the poison and the antidote right behind it on the platform. And we thought that this virtuous circle would be enough to calm things down and to block these vicious conspiracy theories and the action of those who wish to muddy the field, as it were. Obviously, we have understood since then that it was totally inadequate. So, have we no defenses? Is this a lost battle in advance? For example, is lying seen 10 times more than fact-checking? Everybody's had that experience in social networks. But I don't think that that's the case. I think there's several players, several stakeholders. There's, first of all, the governments. We shouldn't ignore them or forget them. They were kind of slow. They were not on board at all. They didn't see it coming. And when they woke up, they didn't necessarily, they kind of were, we saw this in Germany about fake news with the first few years after the word became popular after Trump's victory. We had a law in France and in Germany which just didn't work. Those laws did not work against fake news. They were just totally misplaced, and they don't even exist anymore because they were requiring that a judge should decide in 24 hours if news was true or false. We knew very well that checking an information doesn't take 24 hours, and that a judge that is not equipped to do so could not decide on something like that. And that means that fake information is validated because it was not stricken. So there are some misfires on the part of the public authorities to control this phenomena, which we still had under poor control at the time. I don't think we need to make laws and or rules to fix this. The patient, we don't want to kill the patient by treating it, and that is a risk. In the same way, when the French government a few days ago was speaking about cutting social networks when there were riots, as we saw, I think that's an absolutely catastrophic error. That should be the last recourse. If platforms don't do their work, what's their job? It's to respect the law. It's not complicated. There are laws. When somebody incites to racial hate or to lynching or to racism or anti-Semitism or whatever, all of that's illegal under the law, and it's also illegal online. It's up to the government to have those laws respected, and when that's not the case, there can be sanctions or some kind of punishment with a graduation of the severity of the sanction. But the first reflex cannot be turn off the social networks when there is a phenomena that we find extremely bothersome, and apply the law before you move on to measures that would curtail liberty, because we see elsewhere in the world that this is basically censorship. And we, in the so-called name of civil peace, and on the contrary, this is censure. So we need to be careful not to follow these. There are many measures that the government can entertain. Thierry Breton the other day, who's the European Commissioner, proposed, and I think it's a very good idea, that everything that's generated by artificial intelligence should be specified. You say this picture has been generated by artificial intelligence. Today, you could require that all generators of image, you give the image you want. I want a Ukrainian soldier carrying out an old man with a burning building in the back. And you'll have a picture that corresponds exactly to what you said. Everything is true, taken from 14 billion pictures, but doesn't represent something that actually happened. If it's written that this is a artificial intelligence that produced the picture, that's already a first step in the right direction. Not to stop people from falling into the trap, but in any case, it's at least some way of containing the trap to be too big. There are other things that platforms should and must do. Platforms at the very center of these various problems. The platforms, I mean by that, Meta for Facebook or WhatsApp and Twitter, Snapchat that we talked about lately, TikTok and so forth. For a long time, they were protected by saying, we are just pipes. We don't, what's in the pipe is not our business, which is totally hypocritical and unacceptable. But these are not, editors-in-chief either. These platforms, we don't want them to become editors-in-chief of content of something that doesn't exist. Twitter is, they're not media. But there are things that may be done. And the good level is what's happening on the European level, where we have the Commission represents 500 million, almost 500 million users of these platforms, and they can impose, they can have an arm wrestling with companies which have a lot of clout to these days. In fact, they're stronger than the strength of governments. So the European level is the right level in terms of data protection acts and other factors where we can establish that force. We have, in Reporters Without Borders, we proposed, and the minister referred to that, Journalism Trust Initiative, which is a kind of certification of the quality of the news, which we're negotiating with the platform. So they include this in their algorithms. We can see that today, if you want to make money on Facebook or on a platform, all you have to do is produce total crap. Sorry for the word, because you've generated a lot of traffic, so therefore you did the right thing, because you get a lot of ads revenue. So if they give a premium to quality, the bonus that you actually have of producing bad quality and disinformation is not as financially advantageous. Just an anecdote, during the electoral campaign in the US, the thing that was the most shared on Facebook was the revelation that Hillary Clinton belonged to a satanic sect. And that was seen by tens of millions of homes. And they ran a query. The Russians weren't behind that. It was a student that was behind that, who just had a good idea to make money to pay for studies. And that was to do the most extravagant thing and publish it online and get a lot of likes. He did it on Facebook, which circulated virally because it was wonderful. And he made a lot of money. And when the New York Times went to see the guy, and he thought his life was over, and that he was going to go to hell. In fact, he got hired by the a different startup in the next day. So a third factor, and that's what civil society must do and can do. You and I, and we're not government, and we're not platforms. Obviously, we have a major responsibility nonetheless, because journalism of quality is, you have to deserve it, and you have to justify it. It's not innate, and it's not necessarily visible by the consumers, by readers, or sorry. So the low level of credibility of media is also due to the media themselves. So let's make it our work to make something more credible out of it, to do better journalism. I'm totally convinced that the antidote to disinformation is journalism and its quality and journalistic quality, and that's not enough. We also need to win over that trust that we have often lost. We as journalists need to do our share, and a part of the solution is us. I'd like to conclude with a quote from Hannah Arendt. We like in France quoted intellectuals, but it's basically because this philosopher who was confronted with totalitarianism said some pretty relevant things before the time of internet, and that are extremely applicable today. Hannah Arendt was saying, when everybody's lying to you all the time, the result is not what you think about the lies, is that nobody believes anything. People that can no longer believe cannot have an opinion. They're deprived not only of the capacity for action, but the capacity of thinking and judging. And with this kind of people, you can do whatever you want with. And that is the world that we don't want today. And it is our challenge for all of us here together today, and it is the challenge that we, I'm certain, will be able to respond to. Thank you.